Hello and welcome to a video lecture for animal behavior. So we have pages in your textbook that you can read that go over some of the terms and the items from these notes here. So pages 141 to 151 in your Elsevier Veterinary Assisting textbook. So you can have a read through those. And then I'm going to kind of highlight some terms and go over some things in this lecture, sorry. All right, so first let's talk about a few terms. So one term that comes up when talking about behavior in animals is ethology. So remember, ology means the study of, right, when we talk about our word parts. So ethology, that's the study of animal behavior, the things that animals do. Imprinting is kind of an important process that happens right after the birth of a new animal. And it's basically the patterns of behavior that bond that animal to their caregiver. So I'm sure you guys have heard of imprinting in ducks before, because that's like a pretty popular example, and it's a pretty extreme example. With ducks, the first thing that they see when they hatch from their eggs, they imprint to. So they bond to those guys, and then they'll follow them around, whatever. So if it's the mama duck or if it's you, they'll imprint to you and bond with that caregiver. And then socialization is something that we talk about tons with dogs and cats. So it's all well and good for a wild animal to not want anything to do with people. But if you have a pet animal in your home, you're going to want an animal that's pretty adaptable and able to handle a lot of new experiences. And socialization is going to help with that. So socializing a puppy or a kitten is the process of exposing them to new experiences, people, animals, and places. And by exposing them to those things when they're young, the goal is to avoid anxious or fearful behaviors as an adult. So it kind of goes into that whole, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. If you can expose puppies and kittens to a bunch of new experiences when they're babies, in theory, they are less frightful as adult animals. So the socialization periods that are most important for dogs, it's typically between 3 and 14 weeks. Cats, it's between 2 and 9 weeks. So most often animals that are going to a new home from their breeder or, a shelter environment or something, typically you're not able to take home cats or dogs that are younger than 8 weeks. And with dogs, I've seen them get adopted out, like from breeders wise anyway, as old as 16 weeks. So you can see that those socialization periods, we're really relying heavily on like breeders or whoever's caring for the litter early on in their lives. We're really relying on them for that socialization. So that's something I do like to discuss with clients when they're thinking about getting a new animal, where they're getting the animal from and what kind of socialization is happening. So it's nice if you're getting an animal from a breeder, if that breeder has done, run the vacuum around them, have kids at home, meet a variety of people if possible, take them to the vet, take them to the dog park, if possible, right? If they got their vaccines, because we don't want to scare those animals when they're older and that socialization period is closed. So you can see those important socialization periods for dogs and cats are often when, as the owner of the animal, we don't even have access to those animals. Okay, so typically it's before then that we're adopting them. So let's talk about some behavior training. So VOAs, you guys should have at least a general knowledge about animal behavior training because people are going to ask you about it in clinic. So usually I just kind of go with if it's an easy enough question to answer, then I'll answer it. But a lot of the time, if it's more specialized questions, like if I have an animal that's really aggressive or something, I'm going to refer that client to a behavioral specialist to help them professionally, because I think a lot of behavior issues go deeper than what we really have the capacity to help the client with in the hospital, okay? So we can definitely help with things like, how do you teach the dog to sit, right? We can help them with things like that. or even just basic, like, housebreaking, or, teaching them dogs to go outside, or cats, you don't really need to teach them to use their litter box. But we can offer advice about litter box issues as well, right? So those kind of things we can talk about, but anything deeper than that, I would refer them to a behavioral specialist. Also, I always really strongly recommend clients take dogs especially to obedience training. I think it's really important for all dogs to know at least like sit, stay, come commands, right? We want dogs to have a good recall, because if they're like running into the street, we want to be able to call them back so they don't get hit by a car. It's just nice for us in the vet clinic if they know like sit and lie down. Even shake a paw is useful for like pulling blood and stuff. And we want a dog to stay when we ask it to stay. So those are all things that are nice skills for dogs to have, like from us as a vet perspective and from the client's perspective as well. So I just think it's a good idea for people to take their animals to puppy class, because it's a good socialization experience as well for them. Okay, so let's talk about operant conditioning then. So operant conditioning is one of the ways that we can do behavior training. So operant conditioning is basically, in the most simplest terms, associating a behavior with a punishment. So if we don't want the behavior to happen again, or a reward if we want to encourage it to happen again. Okay, so punishments, if we, every time the dog, every time the dog tries to bite you, you hit them, that would be a punishment. Okay, so if they're like nipping at you, right? Like I'm talking like puppy nipping, not like the dog's attacking you or anything, but like puppies nipping at you and you hit the dog, that's a punishment. Okay, and then a reinforcement or a reward is when the dog does something we like and we give them a treat, or we give them lots of praise, and that encourages the animal to do that behavior more often. So punishments basically decrease the likelihood of a behavior happening. Reinforcement or reward increases the behavior happening. So we have a couple different categories or types down here. So positive or negative, and then punishment and reinforcement are the terms used in these examples. So when we talk about positive, we're introducing something, okay? So our first example here is positive punishment. So we're introducing a punishment after a behavior. So typically a positive punishment is a situation where the animal has done a behavior we don't want to see again, so we punish it and try to discourage the behavior, okay? So the formal definition here is an aversive consequence. Something that's aversive is negative, we don't like it. An aversive consequence is presented after an undesired behavior. And the example here is like if the dog's nipped at you and you hit them, you've introduced or positive a punishment, okay? And then when it's negative, like a negative punishment means that we're removing something, okay? So positive means we're introducing something, negative means we're removing something. So in this case, a negative punishment means that we already have something that's reinforcing the animal and we're removing it after an undesired behavior, okay? So in this case, an example is that if you're playing with the dog and the dog starts nipping at you, you stop playing and you ignore the dog. So you're punishing the dog by removing the positive reinforcement, okay? Does that make sense? Hopefully. And then moving on to the reinforcement ones, a positive reinforcement, which is the best way, honestly, to do training with animals, is when they've done a good behavior, something you want to see, a desired behavior, you present a reinforcing stimulus. So you tell the dog to sit and they sit, you give them a treat. So that's positive reinforcement. Positive means we're introducing the stimulus, and the stimulus is a reinforcement, okay? And then, so a negative reinforcement means that negative, we're taking something away. And then in this case, it's an aversive stimulus. So we're reinforcing the behavior by removing something bad, okay? So the example here is using an electric fence to teach the dog the boundaries of a yard. So when the dog leaves the yard and they have like a shock collar, an electric fence or whatever, it's shocking them. So that's a negative stimulus, right? An aversive stimulus. But when they return to the yard, which is the desired behavior, that aversive stimulus stops. So it reinforces the behavior, okay? So the dog is more likely to stay in the yard because they don't want that shock behavior or shock stimulus, right? Okay. So positive, we're introducing something. Negative, we're taking something away, okay? So hopefully that makes sense for you. If you do have questions about those, certainly ask them in the virtual classroom or the chat. So then in your textbook, they talk about using so this is operant conditioning is basically the basis of all the other programs, okay? We're going to talk about some specific behavior modification programs or things that we can do to help with behavior issues or training at home. So there is a table in your textbook. It's on page 149 and it details all of these. I've just kind of, broken it down to some little quick notes here. So the command response reward is a really basic behavior modification program. It's a really popular one. It's where you say sit to the dog. When the dog sits, you give them a treat. So you give them a command. When the dog does the command correctly, you give them the reward. All right? So that's like many people use that. We do that even with ourselves, I'm sure. If you've ever been like, hey, I really don't feel like doing my homework, but if I study for 15 minutes, I can have some ice cream after. That's basically command response reward. So clicker training, that's something you've probably heard of as well. It's pretty popular. What we're doing there is basically command response reward, but what we're doing is we're linking the click sound to the reward. So the click sound becomes the reward. So the clicker is using sounds to indicate correct behavior. And so like you click and give them a treat, click, treat. And eventually that click and that treat become linked in the brain as a reward. And you can use that clicker to reward behavior, okay? So it's kind of like taking that command response reward one step further. Next we have extinction programs. So if we're using an extinction program, we want to eliminate a problem behavior by removing reinforcement. So if you have a dog that, it's a puppy, you're playing with it and it's constantly nipping at you, stopping playing and ignoring them removes that reinforcement. Some people get really confused with this because they think, my mom is one I think that does this a lot. She has like a little chihuahua and it's like snarly and bitey with everyone except for her. So if I walk into a room and the dog starts barking at me, she right away picks the dog up and is telling it, no, don't be barking. But what would actually help that behavior better, what she's actually doing is rewarding the behavior, right? Because she's picking the dog up and cuddling it. But if you ignored the dog and stopped doing that reinforcement, it might actually remove that behavior from the dog's repertoire, right? So if there's something that your dog's not liking, ignoring the behavior and not reinforcing it will stop that behavior. Basically, animals don't want to do something they're not getting a reward for. Next is aversion therapy. So if we have an aversion therapy situation going on, we have something that the animal wants to do. We don't want them to do it. We're going to associate something unpleasant with it. So if a dog is chewing on their bandage all the time, we have something called bitter apple spray, which we can spray onto the bandage. It makes the bandage material taste terrible. If any of you have ever been nail biters and they have that like no bite stuff that you can paint onto your nails, it makes the nails taste really bad. It's the same kind of idea, right? You're trying to stop a behavior by making it unpleasant. So we can do that with bitter apple spray and chewing. We can do that with like cats. I know cats don't really like the feel of tin foil. So like if you have a cat that's jumping on your counters, you could put tin foil down. When the cat jumps up there, they're like, ugh, I don't like this, and they jump down. So it stops the behavior by associating it with something unpleasant. Avoidance as well, same kind of idea. So aversion is more associating the associating the unpleasant stimulus with an object. Avoidance is associating an unpleasant stimulus with a behavior. So yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something. Like if every time your cat meows and you don't like them meowing, you sprayed them with water. I'm not saying to do that. That's cruel, I think. Cats want to talk just like we do. But basically we're associating something with a behavior as opposed to like an object. So aversion is for objects, avoidance is a behavior, okay? Both are associating an unpleasant stimulus with it. And then habituation, we're getting an animal used to some kind of stimulus by surrounding them with it at low levels. So let's say the dog is really afraid of, I don't know, thunder, let's say. We can have like a CD, let's say that's a recording of thunder, and we can have it on really quietly. And we can slowly, get them used to it by having that sound around them all the time, and just having it in a quiet, low level. So that can get the animal used to it. It's habituated to it. We can also use counter conditioning. Counter conditioning is a really good one to use with puppies. So we're replacing an undesired behavior with a desired behavior. So the undesired behavior with puppies, they're chewing your shoes. A desired behavior, they're chewing the toy that you bought them and spent $45 on that they don't touch. Okay, so counter conditioning is they're chewing on the shoe. No, we take away the shoe and then give them the good toy, the toy that we want them to chew on, and then praise them for chewing on that. Okay, so I always tell clients, if you're telling your animal no about something, you need to give them a yes, and that's the counter conditioning. Okay, they're showing you that they need to do some kind of behavior. So with puppies, chewing is a really big one because they're all teething, right? So they're telling you, I need to chew. And you can say, as the client or the owner of the animal, you can say, well, yes, you can chew. Not my shoe though, chew this toy. Okay, and that's counter conditioning. We're giving them something else to do. So we're replacing something undesired with something desired. Our next method of behavior training, we can use desensitization. So desensitization is gradually exposing an animal to a stimulus that causes fear or anxiety, and then slowly increasing the amount of time that they're dealing with and decreasing the distance. So let's say you have an animal that's really afraid of the vacuum. What we can do is, turn the vacuum on from really far away, leave it on for a couple seconds, and then turn it off. And the dog's or the cat's whatever, kind of whips their head around, looks at it, and is like, what the heck was that? And then kind of moves on from it, right? And we can slowly increase the time that you have that vacuum on and decrease how far away you are from them. Okay, so that's a good way to build up that tolerance with something that causes fear or anxiety. We'll talk about a little bit later on using desensitization for animals that have separation anxiety, which I have a feeling we're going to end up having to deal with quite a bit when COVID restrictions are over and people return back to work, just as like a sidebar here. So I think that will be a good one to discuss. Because I think you guys will be probably talking with clients about that a fair bit, because their animals will be used to them being home all the time. And then when they leave to go back to work, they're going to be pretty stressed about it, I think. Okay, so we can also use environmental modification. So environmental modification means we're just changing things in the environment to allow the animal the best success to have good behavior, okay? So one thing we can do, if we have a cat that is not using their litter box, one thing I will always ask clients is, where is the litter box located? So people don't want the litter box in the living room because it stinks and it's yucky looking. But what we do is we stash it in places where no one goes, things like the furnace room or the laundry room or somewhere out of the way. And those kind of places tend to be a little bit scary, a little bit dark, a little bit noisy, and especially furnace rooms, noisy in an unexpected way. I don't know about your guys' furnaces, but mine will, because the fan turns on randomly, right? So it'll all of a sudden kick on and start going. Sometimes furnaces make like a kind of bang sound when they start. If the cat is in the litter box and that happens, that's going to scare the cat. And then what we've done is we have created an aversion. We have associated an unpleasant stimulus, the scary furnace turning on suddenly, with a behavior or a situation, the litter box, right? So the animal doesn't want to go anywhere near it now. So one thing we can do then is change where that litter box is located. Get it out of the furnace room, put it in a quiet place. That's going to be a lot better for the cat, and then the cat won't be using the litter box or using the bathroom outside the litter box, right? Same with cat scratching. We can kind of control the environment, and we'll talk about that a little later on, to control where the cat scratches. So environmental modification can be a helpful tool as well. And then the last two are kind of things that are definitely doctor related. The previous, 9 are things that clients could try at home and work on their own. Clients can't do surgery and clients can't offer medication though. So that's something where if they need those kind of things, they're going to be coming to us for. So surgery, if we neuter animals at a younger age, it can decrease some forms of aggression. So that's a good move to do, is neutering animals young. It is also possible to debark animals. So basically they just kind of cut the vocal cords. Honestly, the dog still barks and it sounds awful and tragic. It's less like kind of like a sound as opposed to a barking sound. Debarking is a pretty controversial surgery though. I don't think anyone in the city is doing it. Declawing is a procedure in which the claws of a cat are removed. But the thing that people don't understand about declawing is that the claw, they're not just cutting the nail off. They have to remove the entire first bone. So if you look at your finger, we're removing this entire first, like up to the first knuckle, to be able to remove that nail. So yes, that will stop scratching, but at what cost to the cat, right? So it is not a very nice surgery to do for cats. And lucky us, in Manitoba, there was recently a vote with the MVMA about whether declawing should be a banned procedure, and 75% of veterinarians agreed it should be banned. So it is no longer legal. You'd be breaking bylaws to declaw a cat for like behavior reasons, right? Like for to prevent scratching or whatever. So you could still, like, if there was like cancer in that bone, you could still remove it, right? But we're not doing declawing anymore. It's illegal in Manitoba. So that's nice. And then also we have medication options. So Clomicalm is kind of like an anti-anxiety medication. Zilkine is a nutraceutical, which means that it's a food-based product. It's not a drug. And Zilkine, it's like a casein, it's milk protein, and that can have a calming effect on animals as well. So there's a bunch of different natural kind of options as well, like homeopathic medications that can be helpful with anxiety or like fear issues in animals. Okay, so those are the 11 different, what do we call them? Behavior modification programs. So again, check in your textbook for a little bit more details in that chart that's in the textbook. So now we're going to talk about some common cat behavior and dog behavior issues that you'll run into in the clinic. So number one with cats, the things we probably see the most is inappropriate elimination, which means that they're not using their litter box. And I would say probably like 90% of the time, it's because the clients aren't observing good litter box habits. So they either leave it really messy. So we want to clean the litter box daily, ideally. We also need to consider if the animal can access the litter box. So lots of people, if they have a basement, the litter box is in the basement. You have an 18-year-old cat, they don't want to walk down your rickety stairs to the basement anymore. They have arthritis and they're just tired. So sometimes we need to think about where our litter box location is and think if it's possible for the animal to get to it. Sometimes as well, if the animal's older, they just forget where the litter box is. So having it in a really like easy to access area is going to be easier for them. This height of the litter box can be an issue too, especially with older cats. If they have arthritis, it might be difficult to step into a really high-walled litter box. So getting a large and low litter box might be a better option than something that's like deep and small. We want the litter box located in a quiet area. Cats don't like to be disturbed when they're using the bathroom. Kind of like all of us, I'm sure. So having a quiet location is going to be better for cats. Things like the laundry room aren't great places. Also, we want to consider how many litter boxes are in the house. So if you have, there's an easy formula here. We want to look at how many cats live in the home and have a litter box for each of them and then one extra. Lots of times clients think that's a little bit overkill. But like if you have a multi-cat home, sometimes what happens is cats will stake out like, this is my litter box, and they don't want other cats to use it, and they'll guard it. So if you only have the one litter box, your shy cat is going to get picked on by the other cat and not have a place to go. And then they're going to start using your laundry basket. Or I had one client who was confident that their cat was blocked because they didn't have any pee in the litter box. The pee was in the grates, like into the like the heating grates, the furnace grates. The cat was peeing into the ductwork. So they'll find other options if they're not able to get to or use their litter box. Fine-grained litter tends to be best for cats. Sometimes you need to do a little bit of trial and error. Kitty litter, I don't know about you guys if you have cats and you've used kitty litter. Lots of kitty litter is really dusty. That's gross for us. It's gross for cats too, especially if they have like asthma. A dusty litter box can really exasperate that and they don't want to use it. So having a fine-grained litter that isn't dusty is going to be a good choice for them. And also scents. Cats are really scent sensitive. So we shouldn't really be using like aggressive, strong cleaners in the litter box because those big smells can be really bad for the cats. They don't want to use the box because it's aversive to them. And then different litter types. Some cats like a bigger, chunkier litter, something like Yesterday's News. Some like that, really fine clumping litter. Whatever the cat likes. Sometimes it takes a little bit of trial and error. And I usually don't recommend that people change their litter box substrate, so like the litter, really quickly, because sometimes that can put the cat off using the litter box too if they just don't like the litter. So that's something to consider as well, as if a cat suddenly stops using the litter box if the type of litter has changed. And then cats love litter boxes to do their business because that's what they would do in the wild. They're sand creatures, right? They live in the desert originally. So what they would do is dig a hole and then bury it in the sand, right? So that's what they're mimicking with the litter box. It's just a natural behavior for them to use a litter box. So if we can make that as close to their natural environment as possible, that's best. So that means that we want to have a good amount of litter in our litter boxes. A depth of at least 2 inches is ideal. I personally fill it up much more than that. I find the deeper the litter, the less scraping of pee clumps off the bottom you need to do. So I think that's kind of nice. And then lastly, we want litter boxes uncovered. Cats don't really like covered boxes because, for one thing, it stinks in there, right? Like if you open up the covered box and you're stunk out, think about what your poor cat has to do while it's in there doing its business, right? Those ammonia smells can be really harsh and strong, especially if you don't clean your box every day. A covered litter box is really inappropriate. Also, if you have multiple cats, especially, covered litter boxes can freak cats out because they might feel like they're trapped in there if another cat is outside the litter box. They also might be really on edge because they don't know if anything's approaching. They can't see out the litter box or the covered box. So that's something to consider as well. So if anyone has a cat that isn't using the litter box, these are all questions I'm going to ask them about. I'm going to ask them about how often they're cleaning it, the location and if it's easy to access for the animal, how many litter boxes they have, what type and how deep their litter is, and whether that box is uncovered. Those are all things I'm going to ask to try to hone in on what might be causing the problem with the litter box. So ideally, these are all things that we want to have to create good litter box habits. So if you have kittens, observe these rules and they're really likely to stick with using the litter box for life. So cat behavior issue number 2 is aggression. Cats tend to direct their aggression at other cats or other dogs more so than people. And a lot of the time that's a redirected aggression. So what that means is the cat isn't able to attack its actual target, so it's redirecting to a closer or more vulnerable target. So I have an example. A friend of mine had a cat that was just started attacking all the other cats in her home. And she was like, what the heck? This cat's usually so kind and sweet. Why is this cat so angry all of a sudden? Brought him in, did some workup just to see if there was something going on. Sometimes cats, when they're sick, will act out aggressively, but everything was fine with the cat. So she just started doing some observing. She got curious and she saw that there's a stray cat that kept coming into her yard and like peeing all over stuff in the yard. And her cats, which were all indoor cats, could see this cat through the window. And her cat that was being aggressive with the other cats desperately wanted to go beat up this cat, but couldn't. So redirected to the other cats in the home. So that's something that often will happen with cats, is that they can't take it out on the actual target, so they take it out on something nearby. You might have a cat that's frustrated with a dog in the home, but like the dog's way bigger than the cat, so they can't really go and beat the dog up. So maybe they take it out on their fellow cat. So things like that are likely to happen with cats. So if that is the case, again, I would modify the environment. Maybe try to find a way to keep that cat out of your yard. Shut the windows on that yard so that the cat can't see the angry cat anymore. I think that's what she ended up doing, is she just closed the door to the room, and then the cat was fine and wasn't aggressive anymore. So sometimes it's just as simple as something like that. Also, aggressive behavior from cats, just as a side note, tends to be more common in cats that have been declawed. So we'll see a lot more biting behavior in those cats because they don't have their claws to try to defend themselves with. And then scratching. Scratching is something that everyone hates. I hate it too. I have a cat and he scratches up my bed and I hate it. But it is a natural behavior in cats. So cats need to do that scratching behavior. It's just part of who they are. It's built into their existence, right? So there's a few purposes for that scratching behavior. So number 1, cats are using that to mark their territory. In the wild, they would scratch on trees and leave those scent marks behind. That warns other cats that this is someone else's territory. So they might want to avoid that area, right? They're doing that in your home too. This is mine, this is mine. That's why they're scratching those things, okay? So they have scent markers like in their feet, and when they're scratching, it leaves those scents. As well as just plain good exercise and stretching, right? Darn, watching a cat on a like scratching on a scratching post looks like it feels good, right? They're stretching and scratching out those those knots. It feels great, right? So that's part of their behavior as well. And then also it serves a grooming purpose because the outer layer of their claws gets really built up, and the scratching will help to remove those dead outer layers. And then it sharpens them to a nice sharp point so that they can, fight off their enemies. Cats haven't clued in yet, though, that like living indoors, they don't really have a lot of enemies, so they don't need to do that. But it still is a natural behavior that's locked in, right? So people will often ask, well, how can I stop my cat from scratching? You can't. Your cat is always going to scratch. Scratching is a normal behavior for cats, and you can't stop them from doing it. But what we can do is we can use counter conditioning to get them away from spots you don't want them scratching and redirect them onto surfaces that you are okay with them scratching. So I don't want my cat to scratch my bed. I can put a nice big old scratching post right there for him, and he'll be like, oh yeah, this is way better. I'd be scratching on the scratching post. So that's something I can do with counter conditioning. I can also use an aversive therapy. So I can associate a bad stimulus with an object I don't want them scratching. So I can spray bad smells or really perfumey perfumes on my bed, and then the cat won't want to go scratching on those things because they smell so terrible. There are also some pheromones available that you can spray on things as well that will stop them from scratching certain objects too. So that's an option too. And then there's the option of soft paws. So soft paws are like nail caps that go over top the cat's nails. So while they're still able to do the movement of scratching, the nails are covered, so they're not doing any damage with the scratching. So that's an option as well. Soft paws can be a little bit tricky to put on, so often we will put them on in clinic. I always kind of joke that like one free tech with every soft paw application, because it's super glue that holds them on. And inevitably I always get super glue all over my fingers and I'm gluing myself to the cat. It's such a whole thing. So soft paws aren't my favorite, but it is possible for clients to put them on at home, or we can do them in the hospital. And then increasing exercise and mental stimulation is going to help with all kinds of behaviors with cats. Cats indoors, they're pretty bored. There's not a lot going on in the house for cats. So if we can make sure that we've got really interesting toys for them, if there's like windows that they can look, like on my back windows into my backyard, I always joke is Charlie TV, because he loves to just sit in the window. We have so many squirrels and bunnies and birds in our backyard that he just sits there and watches them and loves it. So that's some good mental stimulation for him. Doing exercise and playing games with them are all great ways to distract them from some of those negative behaviors. Animals that are bored are gonna come up with things to do, but they are almost always gonna come up with bad ideas. They're gonna wreck your stuff, basically. All right, so those are kind of the three main things that we hear about most with cat behavior issues. And then dog behavior issues, the things that we hear the most about is destructive behavior in puppies, number 1. Aggression, number 2. You notice that's the same in dogs and cats, that aggression is something that people will reach out for help with. And then separation anxiety for dogs as well. So destructive behavior in puppies. One thing that we can do to, prevent that is to try to make sure there's lots of really cool toys around for the dog to play with. So we'll use some counter conditioning there, right? We want to have fun toys available so that they don't play with like our shoes or I don't know what else, our books. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of things that my dog chewed when he was a puppy. We can use counter conditioning. Replace those undesired objects like your shoes or like your kitchen utensils with desired options, or so like toys. We can also use that bitter apple spray to create aversion to an object. I don't know though how much you want to spray bitter apple spray on like your own shoes and stuff like that. So that might not really work for you. And then crate training with puppies. So I did include an article in today's classroom about different training options and methods. And in that link, there's links to crate training. And I think crate training is a really excellent thing you can do for your dog. Lots of people are uncomfortable with crate training because they think they're just putting their dog in a cage and leaving them there. That's not really the case though. Crate training is an excellent way to keep your dog safe. So if you're not home, they can be in the crate and they won't be chewing all your stuff, right? So you can keep them safe and keep your stuff safe. Crates are like a den for dogs. Dogs are den animals. They want to have a nice safe space for them. So the crate is the way to go for that. So crate training doesn't have to be difficult and it doesn't have to be scary or traumatizing to the dog, right? So how I did crate training with my puppy is I would just like put a bunch of treats in there and let him run around and explore and go in and look. And we just kind of slowly worked up to keeping him in the crate. So again, we use that, I'm just going to scroll up here for it, like desensitization, habituation, right? We're getting the dog used to it little bits at a time by putting them in the kennel and giving them lots of treats and making it a good, fun experience, okay? So I also would never use the crate as like a punishment, right? So we don't want to be like yelling at our dog and sending them into the crate or whatever, because that doesn't create a positive experience. We always want to make that crate a positive place for them. And yeah, so keeping them in the crate is a nice way to keep the animal protected then when you're not home. So aggression is our next behavior issue with dogs. It is the most common behavioral problem that dog owners seek guidance for. So one thing we can do to help with aggression is castrating them early, so neutering them at 6 months. It might reduce some forms of aggressive behavior, but not all. Aggression in dogs, we always just refer to a professional behavior specialist, because it's usually kind of beyond what we can help with in the vet clinic. So we want a specialist to work directly with the client and kind of do special one-on-one training with the dog. There are times when there are dogs that are, like the client has done professional behavior help with them and it's still not really helping. I have seen a couple dogs euthanized for extreme aggression. So that's not something that's great. Ideally, if we can work with animals when they're younger and avoid some of those aggression behaviors, that would be ideal. But sometimes that just isn't the case. So professional behavior specialists are going to be your best bet for aggression issues in animals. Anytime an animal becomes suddenly aggressive, I do, though, want to do some kind of medical workup on that dog or cat. Because sometimes, I mean, I'm sure you guys get it too, right? If you feel sick or you feel like you're in pain, you're just crabbier, right? You have a lower tolerance for anything. So you're much more likely to lash out. And that's same with dogs and cats, right? They're a lot more likely to be aggressive if something's hurting or they're sick. So we can help them with that if that's what's causing the aggression. If it goes beyond that, if the dog gets a clean bill of health and they're still aggressive, we're wanting to send them to a behavior specialist. Okay, and then separation anxiety. That is a big one with dogs, really big one. Very, very common to have anxiety issues in general. Like thunder, lightning, those kind of things are really scary to dogs. Fireworks, vacuums, sometimes they're really anxiety about the car. But separation anxiety seems to be one that causes the most issues. It's not always thundering. There aren't always fireworks going on, but you do need to leave your house, at least sometimes. So separation anxiety can be really stressful on dogs and owners. So one thing that can be really stressful is that if the dog is not crate trained and they're just free in the home, dogs that are scared will start to destroy things. Maybe you guys have seen the memes, right? Where like the dog is surrounded by like destroyed couch cushions or something. And, it says like, you left and I thought you were never coming back. I panicked, right? So true. That's totally how their little brains work. It's like, I'm all alone. Oh my God, what am I going to do? And they start trying to cope any way they can. And a lot of the time that's going back to those behaviors where they're destroying things. So it's like a distraction technique for them. But that doesn't work for us. We can't have animals in our home that are wrecking all our stuff. So crate training can really help with that because it keeps them safe. It keeps them away from your property to destroy it. That being said, we want to work up to leaving them alone in their crate. We don't want to just get a crate, shove them in there and go to work for 8 hours. We want to work up to leaving them alone and in that crate. Okay. And I'll describe that in just a minute because I just want to also add the last point, which is medications can help. There are medications that can help with anxiety that we can turn to. I have shared with you in today's classroom an At Dove lecture that's all about different anxiety and fear issues in dogs and different ways that we can treat them. So that will go into a lot more kind of in depth about anxiety stuff. So that's a good lecture for you guys to watch. Okay, so separation anxiety. What we can do with separation anxiety is, first of all, crate train, right? And then we want to use desensitization to help the dog to learn to be alone, right? So what we can do crate training, get the dog used to like sleeping in the kennel, okay? So let's say we're working on getting to the point that at night they sleep inside the kennel, and that's great. And then as they're used to that, we can start working our way up to leaving the house with them in the kennel. So we can say, okay, puppy, kennel, dog's gonna hop in the kennel, we'll close the door, and then inside of the dog, we can start getting ready to leave. put on our jacket, find our keys, and we'll probably see our dogs start to be like, what? What? Those are all signs that you're going. And they might start to feel panicky. And then we can put our keys down, take off our jacket, take off our boots, go let the dog out of the kennel, tons of praise, tons of treats. And they're like, oh, okay, that's kind of weird. I didn't know that they were always going to, I always thought they would leave if they get all their stuff. So, okay. And so we can kind of do that a few times. As the dog starts to not be panicked in that moment, we can step it up, right? So we can actually go to the door, open the door, and then close it. So don't leave the house, just take that next step, right? Again, when the dog's comfortable with that, then we can open the door, leave, shut the door, open the door, come back in right away. And then shut the door, like stay outside for a minute, come in, right? Just start making it longer and longer each time. We can get into the car, drive around the block, pull back in, come in. Basically, we want to teach them that, like, look, you're okay. When I leave, you're okay. And we can do that by just giving them little bits, longer amounts of time as they go. So that's definitely a good way to get them used to that being left alone. All right, so that's all I have for you at this time on behavior issues and etc. So I'll end the lecture here. If you do have any questions at all, do please ask in the chat or save them for the virtual classroom. And then as well, make sure you do watch that at Dove lecture on anxiety because it is a really good one. Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.